Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying!
Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon Podcast. How are you all? Hope you're having a lovely start to your week. It's finally March. The sun is out. I was home this weekend, home in sunny old Bournemouth. I have to say, if you're looking for some sun in the UK, recommend Bournemouth. I feel like people always bash their hometowns. I'm so lucky I grew up in Bournemouth. What a place. Unbelievable. But thank you all so much for being here. Hope you're all doing, that was very random. Hope you're all doing very well. Thank you for joining us on the Cannon Podcast. If you're here for the first time, make sure you like and subscribe, all that good stuff on YouTube. If you're listening to us on Spotify and Apple, make sure you leave us a little review. That would be lovely. I'm here with a full house with Rohan Jivan. Hello.
Hello. How are you? Good.
And I'm good. And my good friend George Vutsas. How are you, sir?
Hello, good sir. I have come to the pod with a question at the very start, and it is going to dagger and absolutely split the British culture. I need to understand what the difference between a crisp is and which I believe, isn't that chips for you guys? And then why French fries are chips. I need to understand the distinction between the two, why that came about.
Why are French fries involved?
Well,
because that was your lot. That was your lot bringing French into this.
So is the idea that the original chip? Why is that a potato chip? Or no, it's a French fry.
Know.
Or like it's
but a crisp makes more sense because they are crisp.
Is that
when you say chip? A chip is like a bit off something. You've chipped something off.
Yeah, because isn't that? I guess.
So I think crisp for what it is makes more sense because you it's like.
But then again, you can get chips that are really crunchy as well and crispy, can't you? So.
Yeah, but it's a chip it's like crispy chips or cheesy
chips. It's the same in India as well. It's the same. Like they'll call chips crisps. And
the bigger question is why you Americans and Canadians got French involved.
Because that's
my bigger question.
We are historically so arrogant that we force the rest of the world to change for us, and then we say, "Why are you doing it wrong?" See, that's how America works. But I think from a Canadian perspective, we're just adopting some of our French roots.
Yeah,
but I don't even think it's French.
Can you speak any French?
Je comprends un peu.
Yes. Hola. I think that means you understand a bit, right? But
yes.
You also you speak Greek.
That I do. I do.
I saw you speak Greek.
I do that a lot more than French, for sure. I can speak Greek a lot more than French.
This guy, PhD student, speaks Greek, handsome, knows ball. What do you do, Rohan?
Nothing.
What do you do here?
Nothing.
do you speak another language?
Yeah, speak Gujarati, speak Hindi. Yeah.
I'm the one slacking here. I speak a bit of Spanish.
So wait. So if you've got Gujarati and Hindi, like just for people that I don't even know, are they like completely different dialects, vocabs, and everything, or is the vocab?
No, it's actually from what I know, it's actually quite similar. Like my Hindi's not very strong. Actually, I say I can speak it well, but when I go to India, I always get clowned for it. Like, oh, you're not pronouncing this right. You're not pronouncing this right. So it's like it's all relative, isn't it? But I can get by in India speaking Gujarati or a little bit of Hindi, but it's a little bit different. But there's a lot of similarities there as well. So
yeah, how to tell Arsenal are 13 points behind.
Yeah,
we don't want to talk about football. We want to talk about languages. Today we want to talk loads of things today. Thank you for joining us on the main pod. We want to talk sporting directors. Some stuff came out this week about sporting directors. We want to talk about the 5 names that were mentioned. We want to talk about we want to talk about mid blocks. Hey, it's going to be a fun pod. But the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about our problems. And we're going to rank our problems, because that's what you do on podcasts, isn't it? And we have 4 categories: injuries, coaching, board and owners, officials, and PGMOL. Those are the 4 categories. We're going to rank them 1 to 4. I think we're all going to be in agreement. We haven't actually told each other where we're going to rank them, but you can play along at home, of course. 4 categories again are injuries, coaching, board and the owners, and officials and PGMOL. I guess we want to get a sense of why this season is going the way it is, and sort of get into those conversations a little bit more broadly. So yes, certainly do play along at home. Let's start with number 4, boys. Number 4. What do we have at number 4? The least impactful on our season. What, in terms of our problems, the least impactful of those categories? I'll start with you, Rohan. Why don't you start with us?
So as you've got PGML, board
and owners, coaching, and injuries.
I would go for coaching, bottom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason why I say it is because it's all relative, and I know a lot of people might not agree with this, but I think our coaching this season, there have been faults that Mikel has shown in games that we've seen these faults previously, i.e. Newcastle away from home, for example. But when we're talking about the drivers of our season and what has really cost Arsenal and is the reason why we are in the position we're in, I don't think the coaching has been a bigger contributor relative to the other options that you have there. Like maybe you could argue with the cup performances and Mikel doing better there, but I genuinely do think that it's bottom for me.
It's difficult to know, isn't it? Because it's like, okay, how do you... Are you translating it directly into points? And that is very hard with coaching because we're going to look at injuries, we're going to look at, and sort of injury luck and sort of that process. But we can literally see Bukayo Saka was injured for this period and our results dropped off, and you can almost directly translate it to points. In terms of the board and the owners, I think we all can directly translate it into points. And in terms of the officials and PGML, there's no debate there. The coaching is a lot harder to translate into
it's
how
a lot harder
to
quantify.
Yeah, how it's actually held us back. But George, I suppose I can remember points this season where we've praised the coaching massively and said, like, actually this has been like a really good coaching performance from Mikel Arteta. And I can also remember coming on the podcast and being like, actually that individual game, whether it was Newcastle or Everton or I think there was a game recently, I suppose the Forest game in some ways or the game before that, and we're asking loads of questions. So I don't quite know contextually. Are we just picking certain games and going, he made a mistake and that's not acceptable? Because a coach has to be able to make mistakes over the course of a season. So I don't quite know how we're judging it.
Not saying that like my thought process is right, but how I did it was, so points were obviously part of my conversation, but between those 4 things, I tried to say which were outliers in terms of their execution and their outcome. So for example, the PGOMLL thing. The number of red cards that are so... Yeah, whatever that was. The refs. In terms of the number of red cards and all the data that we've got out from specific referees, how much of an outlier are Arsenal in the outliers? Are we talking that we're close to the rest of the league, but we're just the worst? Or are we significantly far out in front? We actually have numbers to prove right now that some of these consequences have us significantly out in front of anybody in the Premier League, and in fact, even in Europe's top 5 leagues. We are the 3rd most penalized red card team in Europe's top 5 leagues. That's insane to me. Like, that is a very big outlier. So I put that in an outlier sense. I then had the injury, and I go, when was the last time? You look at our squad totals. I believe that, even Scott Willis did like a breakdown in terms of the amount of injury value lost, and then Arsenal consistently have that top of the list. You go back in seasons, I don't remember a season in which we've been this depleted. Of course, we've had major injuries that we've had to adapt to, but if I'm being honest, the number of different backlines that we've had across the season, again, for me, this has been an outlier in terms of Mikel Arteta's tenure, and I maintain the biggest outlier of all of them has been the board. I have never known a board to do what the hell they did in 2024, so then I'm left with coaching, where, yes, I actually think it's the most thing that has doubled. I don't know how to quantify that, but from last year, I've said this before on different pods, I feel that there's been double the coaching errors this season from Mikel Arteta from my just subjective viewpoint. But I think in the context of those 4, the first 3 have significant outliers as far as Arsenal are concerned. Yeah. And so that's why I have coaching last. But I have to reiterate, for me, I think I've seen double the amount of coaching errors from Mikel Arteta on the whole as opposed to last season. And I named them specifically: the mid-block problem, which we'll talk about in this pod. I think the way that we use Martinelli and the way that we platform certain players has been a very frustrating part to my analysis of Mikel Arteta this season. I actually think when we're talking how Declan Rice is platformed in certain games, playing ahead of the ball, that's a frustration that we know that we keep repeating as a mistake. I look at how Martinelli is platformed on the left wing, and you can maybe blow that up, not just Martinelli, but the left wing problem. The left-hand side is something we don't regularly balance well enough. And then I think as a whole, I do have some other concerns in terms of just the degree to which we platform our forwards. Like, we're having these debates between Salah and everything, and I have a look at our shot totals after transitions, and I have a look at our total forward shot totals, and something's not right there in comparison to the top of the league. So yes, there's some context for some of these as to why, but I do think that we've seen a lot of repetition of mistakes that we do know that don't work. I mean, especially the mid-block stuff that we've talked about on pods quite a bit in terms of adding central players to an already congested central area. He's done that mistake several times, by the way. Like, it's not just recently, it's not just the cups. I look at Inter, the idea that we're going to throw crosses into the box against an Inter team who defend really well with really only Kai Havertz as a target. Like, I don't mind the tactic, but sometimes the tactic hasn't lined up with the players that he's had. And I think he's done that more this season than he did last year. But that could just be me. But again, that's why I would rank it first to last.
And I guess it's like, okay, if an issue is repeated the following season, does that make it worse or does that make it the same error? It's like, you know, it's difficult to say. I think we're all saying coaching last. I think if I'm looking across the season, I'm looking just at the league. I'm looking at drop points. The first drop points we had were against Brighton. There was a red card in that game.
Yeah.
The second drop points we had were against Man City. There was a red card in that game. The third drop points we had were against Bournemouth. There was a red card in that game. Then it was Liverpool, where you could argue that it was and on and on and on, and we sort of go through. The ones where I'm looking more at the coaching are like the Newcastle game, for example, probably the Chelsea game a little bit, and the Everton game. But then I could also look back to last season and pick out, you know, maybe the
West Ham,
the Villa game away, or West Ham or whatever, and I could point out things. I suppose maybe the fact that we're talking about the same things makes the coaching feel a little bit higher on the list in the end. But when you compare it to the other stuff, when I'm looking at the other categories, the officials, the board and the owners and the injuries, they feel like bigger things. I suppose maybe let's leave that there then, and all, if we're all saying that that's where we feel. Do we feel in terms of the coaching there was enough evolution philosophically, just overall? Because I suppose this year I don't feel that, and maybe that comes back to the players that we had. Yeah. But in terms of how we've changed from 23-24 to 24-25, Rohan, I watch other teams develop and I move on, and I'm sort of getting a picture of this season that one of the many issues is there wasn't enough of an idea shift. I don't feel, and maybe that's a coaching issue as well.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult because then it goes back to the injuries and the lack of opportunity we've had to be able to field 11. Like, you can go through Mikel Arteta's tenure at Arsenal and you can look at the evolution of Arsenal, and every single season you have actually seen the squad evolve, whether it's systematically or through a certain player coming into the team that has evolved the side. Like, from 21-22, at the start of that season, we began with that kind of nominal 4-2-3-1 shape, you know, with Kieran Tierney high and wide. But then we kind of transitioned from, I would say, December, where we had that game against Southampton where, you know, it was quite toxic, and then there was that moment in which we played out from the back, build really well through the thirds, and Lacazette scores, and it was the transition of Xhaka moving higher and Tierney coming a bit deeper. And then you go to the 22-23 season, we signed Zinchenko, we signed Jesus, and we go for the predominant shift of an inverted fullback. And then the following season, you know, where 22-23 was very fast, it was vertical, but that led to more transitional opportunities for the opponent. We then went for a more controlled approach, and that came with Declan Rice coming into the team and the consistency that we showed post-2024, in which we're operating at 100-point pace. This season, we haven't really seen a significant shift, but that's because, for me, we've not been able to pick a settled 11. And it's as simple as that, because I feel like we have a serious sample size every single season of us evolving under Mikel in some way. You may not agree to it, but there is an evolution. This season, we haven't seen that. But the evidence suggests that there would have been an evolution. We've just not been able to see it because of the lack of consistency in picking a settled 11. So,
yeah, history would tell us he planned on doing something this season, but I maybe you know, maybe he wouldn't have done it. Who knows? But I guess I think because of the other factors, it's very hard to kind of, and that's, you know, one of the frustrations of this season. I actually went through and was sort of putting together a document of like everything that had happened. And honestly, it's like every 15 days, something. It's like the Marino thing happens, then we get the red card, then the Ben White injury, then the Ødegaard injury. It's like on average, like honestly, I think it ended up being like on average about every 2 weeks, something like that happened.
Which translates...
And you just can't get any consistency in the season.
Yeah, like which translates to the season, because also Arsenal have never gone this season more than 2 games winning consecutively, which is a mad...
We have. We have done that. We've got. I think we've gone like 4 winning.
We've reached 2.
In the Prem, it's like 3, and in all comps, I think it's 4. But it's nothing further than that.
But last year we did like 9. So
yeah. But the point is, it's very small, isn't it? It's a very small. Yeah.
And I think like as a whole, the part of the frustrating thing is I also haven't seen enough signs of him attempting it, even without the players. Like, I don't know if it's profile dependent. So, when you're talking about that transition, an inverted fullback is pretty like substantial to changing your system towards funding that, right? Like, it's a profile change that instigates a system change. As far as the squad, like I look at it, bar needing better quality in the forward line, I don't know if we lack necessarily the profiles to do something different. It's more so I lack the quality in terms of seeing it. And what some might argue you might not have enough quality between the lines. Like, I may want to recruit some more, but we fundamentally have those pieces and we sent them out on loan. Like, we have that type of profile within the squad. We've discovered Ethan, we've discovered Miles. Like, I'm struggling to buy for a profile now. I'm buying for upgrades more than I'm buying for, the squad lacks this type of player. I need to get this specific profile, let's say, which I wasn't saying in 22, 23, 21, 22. Like, there were things I needed to see, and I'm like, wow, this team is really lacking in certain areas. But I think at this point, the team seems complete from a profile standpoint. Now you're just saying, okay, what pieces can I upgrade in the 11? What pieces do I think can be upgraded for the best amount of money? And then going forward, how do I want to have an identity? And you know what? My big challenge to Mikel Arteta is I must see an attacking identity that I can define through a market price. And I'll do it this way. I kind of mentioned this on a previous pod, but goalkeeper, I can identify what a Mikel Arteta goalkeeper is. I think defender, I've seen enough of those. I can identify what a Mikel Arteta defender looks like. Midfielder, I've seen enough of those. Whilst I think I have an idea of what Mikel may like, I still don't think we've had enough samples, certainly with enough confidence, that we can sit there and say, oh yeah, that's a Mikel Arteta attacker. No doubt. Yeah. And I think that's the challenge, not just recruitment-wise, but from Mikel, which I think speaks to our attacking identity problem that we need to be clarified a little bit more.
Let's move on to number 3. So as a reminder, the remaining categories we have are injuries, board and owners, and officials and PGMOL. I think,
we might differ.
Look, obviously we're making excuses for Mikel Arteta by putting him fourth in terms of coaching, but I think it's very different. And we're paid by the club, of course. But I think it's very hard to look at those 3 and not feel that they are in some way 1, 2, and 3. Rohan, I'll come back to you first. What goes in at number 3 for you?
This is hard. I think we're going to differ a lot here.
I think so.
I'm going to go.
That's the joy of podcasting.
I'm going to go for the board. Wait, is it board and officials?
No, they're separate.
Board and owners.
Board and owners. Yeah, I'm going to go for board and owners at third.
Really?
Yeah. I think when I'm looking, so the way I see this is, I think if we had signed X or Y, we could still have been in a similar situation in those games where the officials did cost us points. And I think it could have also still been very difficult for us to overcome that adversity in those games as well. And also, there is the chance that these injuries could have also cascaded through to these other players as well. That's how I kind of see it. But I think it's very close between the 3. Like, I think for me, and I think if Arsenal had more luck with injuries, even though the windows that we've seen haven't been good enough because we haven't brought in attacking quality, I think Arsenal would be closer to Liverpool, and I think we'd stand a really good chance. I really do think that.
It's difficult because, like, you're not saying it it isn't a factor.
It's a massive factor. I think they're all very because when you look at them, I can go through the refereeing and officiating this season, and it has hurt Arsenal so much. And I think had we had a bit more luck there, I think that would have driven us a bit more in a better place than we are. Like, yeah.
George, you evidently disagree. Go on.
No, I was just surprised. I thought the board were the clear number one, and I'm just gonna. The biggest thing for me, the biggest issue with Arsenal Football Club is not buying a forward in 2024. I can't get away from that, especially when I look.
I can't agree with that. But go on.
Yeah, no, I think that has been the biggest issue from. For me, the whole breakdown of last season in which we failed, that at least was unified between Mikel, the board, and the whispers that we heard, was recruiting a certain X factor, was an increase in box efficiency. The quoted reflection on the season was moments in the box. Arsenal didn't do that in the year 2024. Then, on top of that, you receive an unprecedented amount of injuries to the front line that then the board refrain from spending an extra £15 million in terms of the valuation. And you've got a player of Arsenal Football Club publicly going that they need players. I have never been so embarrassed in my life, personally. And the idea that the squad didn't need it or that the market couldn't supply it are all just things I categorically disagree on. So for me, that was the biggest failure of the season. And when I look at injuries and I look at, the officials, I think both represent outliers for their own metrics. But if I'm really looking towards it, I think injuries, when you have a look at it, we've been able to
hang on,
through.
Don't spoil. You've already spoiled number one. Do number three.
Yeah, I'm not ranking those ones. I'm just
sure.
saying in terms of my explanation. When you're saying what leads to what the board and the failures of the board leads to an increased pressure on injuries, which leads to increased pressure on how much officiating can dictate the effect on your season. If you complete the squad, then impacts on injuries and officials are solved. And that's the whole idea of proper ownership, organization, and squad building, that within a season, you'll get things that don't go your way, but it doesn't matter because you've built the squad to adapt to those inflections. So, yeah, that's why I have a look at it, and I just can't justify what the board and ownership have done over 2024. I think it was scandalous. So I think as a 3, so not to do that, that's the only way I had to disagree with the board, because that was the biggest thing for me personally. Officials are my 3rd. In the list. And it comes down to Arsenal, just factually, are the most red-carded team in the league. It's an outlier. It's significant. When you look at it in comparison to our total yellow card count, again, I had referenced a really great breakdown by Scott Willis, who did have a really good idea about how far Arsenal were an outlier, even as far back as 2018-19. You look at the specifics between Michael Oliver, like it's getting to the point where there are legitimate numbers to say, we are punished more. The why, we've had that debate tirelessly all season. But when I'm trying to translate that ultimately in how many points I may see, I'd say there's about at least 5 red cards. The amount of time that we've spent down to 10 men directly affects injuries, directly increases load. So it's not just injuries that you've received, but you've received those because of the poor officiating. It's forced the team into a state where they have to play down to 10 men more than any other team really in the league, certainly more than any top 6. And so, but as a whole, I say, well, that's certainly docked me down 5 or 6 games. But I look at, if I had done the business and got a serious X factor forward across the year, how confident would I have been in terms of adapting not just to those games, to the Champions League, to the Cup games? How competitive do I believe Arsenal, and how confident would I have been at the start of the preseason if I had an Alexander Isak, a Sesko, a top forward in the year 2024? I think I'd be shouting from the rooftops about how much Arsenal are guaranteed a title. And I kind of really pulled back on that when I saw no forward being done. And I got even more worried when I saw nothing being done in January, and it led to a lot of personal questions on KSC. So that was my breakdown.
I think in third for me is also the officials. I think weirdly we've saved this from being a bigger impact on our season by how we've managed it. And actually something I think has been maybe underrated is how well we've managed when we've gone down to 10 men this season. It's happened far too much, but actually if you go through, it's happened, I think it's 5 times. We've lost 2, drawn 2 and won 1. Which, considering the impact that has on you, I don't think is, it could have been much worse in terms of drop points. I think there's bigger things there. I think also, and classic Alex defending the refs, but actually outside of those 5 reds, 2 of which I think are justified in terms of William Saliba's and Miles Lewis Skelly's, I don't think we've had any crazy swings. There's been decisions I've agreed with, things I've disagreed with. There's been points in a season, for example, you come out after half-time after that Wolves thing and we're getting every single 50-50 because he knows he's messed up. I don't look across the rest of the season in terms of the officials other than those moments and go, we've been handed some crazy hard thing. I think it's those specific moments. They're horrible, they're awful, but the reason this doesn't go higher for me is because firstly the other 2 factors are way bigger, but also how we managed it. So it's actually credit to us that this is as low as it is because it could have gone a lot higher. Let's move to second. I'm going to go first on this one. I think I'm going to put the board and the owners here. I hear your point, George, I do. And but I think what you're saying, and the argument you sort of constructed, is that the board starts here and downstream is the rest of the issues. Whereas I would argue it actually starts with the injuries and everything else is further downstream. Not that there is the board have been perfect. I think I remember doing this stream with you on deadline day, and obviously you were really frustrated with how that played out, and so was I. But we went into the season with 7 forwards. 7. They hadn't done enough, absolutely not. But I know I said this on a TCP Live and people sort of came back at me, but I'm going to double down on it. No one at the top of the season was saying, I'm absolutely buzzing with how Arsenal have handled this window. I think we were on a deadline day stream of the summer and we said we wish we'd done more. But there was a general feeling, unless I'm completely misremembering, that we had done enough. There was enough that had been done. Could we have done more? Absolutely. Did we want an Isak? Of course we did. Did we want a Nico Williams or something? Absolutely we did. But we all felt with Saka, Martinelli, Havertz, Jesus, Trossard, and obviously Sterling who'd come in, plus Wanyeri, who I think we have to accept that the club felt would play some part there. There was enough there in terms of the forward areas. The injury situation this season, I've never known anything like it in my life. And if you haven't checked out the data pod that Rohan and George did, it was really, really, really brilliant. And it showed that ultimately the biggest driver of results is injuries. They did you'll probably explain about the me, Rohan, but they did a sort of a thing looking at the last 3 seasons for both City, Liverpool, so all of City, Liverpool and us. And the 3 seasons where points per game dropped were all injury-ridden campaigns. There are campaign that season. And
it was Liverpool's 22, 23 and Man City's current season alongside us.
Yeah. I look at the board in terms of, and that's why they're second, in terms of the reaction, because they didn't react. And I completely agree it is unacceptable to not sign a forward in 2024. But I think we're not looking at them if we're not looking at the injuries, and we've jumped to number 1 now as well. But I think that's why the injuries hit the post to me, because it just and then maybe we should talk about the injuries as an isolated topic as well. Can we do better? Can we do more to prevent them? I think there's some good reading on what Arne Slot's doing at Liverpool in terms of injury prevention at Feyenoord. I think the last 2 seasons in terms of his injury prevention record and the availability of his players was brilliant. He's brought that to Liverpool. Can we learn from that? Can we do better with that? There's absolutely a conversation there. But in terms of how the injuries have affected our season, in terms of the lack of the continuity, the impact on results, the impact on morale, the impact on form, the impact on everything, I feel like and the disruption it's caused. For me, this is the season I will remember as that mad injury season, and there's many lessons to learn from it. But I think that's why and the board should have reacted. But I look back at the summer and I go back to it. No one felt we'd done.
I don't know.
What's the word?
I don't know there.
A maximum. No. Hang on. I don't anyone felt we'd done our maximum, but I think a lot of people felt this was enough to go and compete. And ultimately, the injuries, in my opinion, let us down. But I'll come back to you in a second, George. Rohan, give us your 1 and 2.
Yeah, I mean, injuries is a standout one for me. I think everything else is quite interlinked. But I've said it previously, no team can win a Premier League in these sorts of circumstances. It's just not possible. I'll maintain that. And you can look through the history of the Premier League and teams that have won it, they haven't won it in this sort of situation. Like, go through all the best teams.
Especially with who was injured.
Yeah, exactly. Go through all the best teams over the years that have won the Premier League. I've said this now 3 podcasts in a row. The Henrys for Arsenal, the Rooneys, Ronaldos for Man United, Chelsea, you've got Hazard, Lampard, Leicester, Vardy, Mahrez, Liverpool, Salah, Man City, De Bruyne's, Aguero's, Silva's, Companies, if you want to go all the way back to there. They have these players consistently available for the course of the season, and we've not been able to have that, not just for our star players, but also in other areas in which, like you've alluded to already, we've not been able to pick a settled back line for the entirety of the season. The only big positive that Arsenal have had, I'd say, in terms of injuries consistently since Mikel has came to the club, is Gabriel and Saliba. Gabriel and Saliba have always been available, barring the moment in 22-23 where Saliba went down towards the back end. But that is a partnership that we have really flourished with because they've been able to play games week in, week out. But this season, we've not been able to keep other units, other pods together. And that, for me, is not going to allow you to compete against a Liverpool team that are currently, when you extrapolate for the entirety of the season, are on a 91-point pace. So that's for me the driver. And second, I will put the officiating down second because I've seen a lot of decisions this season against Arsenal that I think have really influenced the game state. It's not just the red cards, it's also Brighton. That penalty decision that was given against us. A shocking penalty decision. And I know we think it's only a couple of points here and there, but when the margins are very thin, like these sorts of moments in games matter a lot, and I think it has really hurt us this season. Like, I don't like doing it because it's kind of sometimes it's like diverting the blame elsewhere, but I just can't not look at it and think of it being a driver of the season in the context of going for a Premier League title. So, yeah, that's where I start.
I think when your people are together, you can deal with many other things. Exactly. You can deal with maybe coaching missteps. You can deal with refereeing decisions. For example, against Bournemouth, we forget we didn't have Bukayo Saka that day. And we've had, in and out all seasons. You can deal with maybe situations that happen with referees or injuries, whatever. When you don't have your people together, it's very hard to do it. And for me, that is the driver. But George, I think you maybe disagree.
Yeah, I don't agree with the characterization that in the summer people felt that we would have been okay with Raheem Sterling. I think
that's not what I said though. I'm saying I think the overall business in the summer, based on the back of last season, because I'm not saying people were okay with Raheem Sterling. What I'm saying is people wanted more, but felt that we could get by with what we had.
Yeah, I really disagree with that, like, a lot. I think the idea, the biggest commentary that I heard with Raheem Sterling was that it was like, we even talked about it being the best Band-Aid if it could. But it was the idea with Band-Aid under the assumption they do something. They do something in January. Is there some financial thing that is blocking us from doing something? That was the whole idea about even making Raheem Sterling somewhat acceptable. And the idea that, okay, fine, at least he will let Bukayo Saka go and play. But we still absolutely need this forward. And the whole idea is, I know I was really disappointed with it. I think if you were to draw up and you were to ask 10 random Arsenal fans in July, what did Arsenal need? And forget the idea that you even have Marino and Calafiori, who I believe most people didn't have, even within their shopping list of a profile. I don't think a Calafiori was. Marino, potentially. A 6'8" was something probably on the minds of Arsenal fans. I think 9 or 10 out of 10 Arsenal fans said a forward of significant quality that was more than £45 million. Not alone. I think 10 out of 10 Arsenal fans do that. And the gap between what a Raheem Sterling loan is to even that, let alone those who I think 7 or 8 out of 10 Arsenal fans said It had to be a marquee forward. It wasn't just that we were looking for depth. We need serious quality injection in the front line. That is something that we've needed for a while. It's finally the summer to do it. And I think the worst part for me is when you start contextualizing it, guys, we made a profit in the summer in the most financially stable and healthiest position that Arsenal have been in decades. And I don't think, if we're being honest, any Arsenal fan thought we would make a profit in the summer after the kind of point total that we did. Then, fast forward, you've now had the injury crisis. Are we saying that anybody felt it was logical to not go and buy a forward after you've got now things that have worsened? So not only did you fail in the summer, but things worsened that you've seen, you've had time to prepare and adapt to it, and you still don't do anything. Like, I think on both ends, I don't know. I can't honestly, because I know I wasn't there personally. I know a lot of people that I talk to, and I just struggle to understand from the club's perspective, if we were all to draw our wish list, the profile wish list of July or June, right? And all of us, I think you have to be honest that at least a 45 million pound forward. And I think I'm being generous. I think I would say everybody wanted a marquee to a serious forward addition. We're talking that was going to be the highest spend profile or player of the summer. That was categorical, I think, in everybody's wish list. And for God's sakes, we didn't even get that, guys. And like, we went to go and get a profit. Guys, to contextualize it, the last time we did that was Petr Cech's window. We got a profit, and we actually spent more whilst out of Europe in order to do it. And I think part of the problem is, in the summer, if I'm remembering correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the reason we didn't go as hard as we did is because we didn't have clarity on Edu. We didn't have clarity on what was happening behind the board. And a lot of thing was, well, is there financial regulation that's impacting us going forward in doing this? And I know I was confident that that wasn't the case, but I couldn't be sure because the accounts hadn't been brought out. Now we have the context that the accounts are out. It's categorical that Arsenal could have done something. The headroom from a PSR perspective, from an SEC perspective, is clear to see. It wasn't financial. That certainly wasn't the case. And I don't know. I think that for me is the biggest failure I've seen from an Arsenal, club entirely. And it gets me so angry because I can't justify it when I look at all these different metrics. I mean, you've got a coach that sat there and gave you records in a Premier League season, and you didn't give him money to spend. You made a profit. You forced him to make a profit on that window. Okay, let's call it financial issues or whatever BS, and I'll call it BS that you want to call it. That you didn't even let the man spend, let alone 50 million pounds, 70 million pounds, which you spent outside of Europe. But let's fast forward. You've now got a ton of injuries, unprecedented amount of injuries. He is begging for somebody. You've got your player begging for somebody, and the reported quotes, so I'll only go by reported quotes that Gunnar Block has talked about, was the biggest reason why people like Ollie Watkins, who were liked by Mikel Arteta, it was a 15 million pound valuation stumbling block that meant we couldn't press forward. I find it categorically insane. I do, personally.
Can I just say, I will move board to second.
George has convinced you. A couple of things on that. I think on the Edu thing, as far as I'm aware, there's no reliable reporting that in the summer that was the reason we didn't spend was because Edu was thinking about leaving, and I think we can't report that as fact. We don't know that. Maybe we can speculate, but I don't think we can know that.
No, but it threw questions into hierarchy. If your sporting director is going to leave, certainly it affects your execution within the window.
But I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm saying we don't know that. I'm saying there wasn't reliable reporting at the time, so and there hasn't been reliable reporting after to suggest that Edu, the reason Arsenal's summer window played out the way it was because of Edu. We can speculate, and maybe we can, but I don't think we can use that as a fact, personally. Then what I'd say is this. I don't actually. I think you're more frustrated than me, but I'm not playing the you're more frustrated, so that's wrong. But I think the frustration to me wouldn't even be there it is downstream of the fact that we had that many injuries. I just think it's the chicken and the egg. I think, and people will disagree with this, and that's fine. Go back to streams and sort of stuff last summer. Go back if you're on X or Reddit or whatever. Go back and look at what you were saying last summer. I agree. People wanted a forward, but there seemed to me to be an acceptance that we just found Kai Havertz at the end of that last season. We would have enough to put up a Premier League challenge. Was it going to be? Was it something everyone was really happy with? Everyone was going, "Thank goodness me, we're going to the season." No, people wanted a forward. Of course they did. I'm not disagreeing with your characterization, but I don't think people were as adamant as they are now that Arsenal needed a forward. I just don't agree. I just don't think that was the case. Some fans might have been, but I think most people felt, okay, let's see how this season plays out. The way this season has played out, and for me the key factor being there, the injuries, people have gone, we should have done that. And then we're retrospectively looking back and going, why didn't we do that in the summer? Which I hear. But to me, the key driver there is the injuries. But Rohan, I want to bring you in.
I agree. I think we did the deadline day stream, and I've actually been very vocal on the board on X as well, and people can see the frustration that I've had in terms of what's kind of changed my mind in terms of putting it second is because, as George alluded to, the January window was really bad. That was really, really bad, because you literally see the likes of Declan Rice being as explicit as possible without getting into any trouble of saying we need help. The managers bring on Kieran Tierney at left wing. That kind of shows the situation we are in. And you have Mikel Arteta as well, who is also giving very clear, indirect hints that we are lacking substance. And when you have your 4 star attackers, obviously Martin Odegaard as well, who's now available, but your 4-star attackers out, and you do nothing when there's still a lot to play for in the season, especially with the Champions League as well. I think that is very much a mindset of, I'm throwing away the season because I don't believe Arsenal will do anything substantial from now to the end of the season. The chances of us signing a player now is not going to change Arsenal's fortunes, which I think is really wrong, especially when you look at the leg room that we do have in forward areas. There's going to be a lot of change. So even if we do go for a riskier move, there's still the opportunities to still sign players in the summer without that being a problem to our future. Just look at our forward options and what is going to happen in the summer, the likelihood of a lot of these players leaving. So that's where I'm really frustrated on that. But the injuries for me is the big one, because I've not seen something like this at Arsenal ever. I've never seen it. I've never seen every couple of weeks he goes down. Then 2 weeks later, another goes down. Then another goes down. It's goodness me, we're never getting a break here. And that's for so the reason why I have injuries as a standout candidate here is because if Arsenal had similar fortune with injuries to what they had last season, I think we could win the Premier League. And I'm confident we could, And that's why I think that has been the driver of Arsenal not being in the position to compete at full throttle. So, whereas I think if the board had signed an attacker, which I hear what you're saying, George, and I do agree with it, I still think with what we've seen injury-wise, it might have not changed our fortunes in the context of winning a league.
Mm. And just quickly as well, it's not as if the league was in this unbelievably great position. We had all these injuries, and then the board didn't react, and then that's not the way the season's played out. We lost points against Brighton, City, Bournemouth, Liverpool, Newcastle, Chelsea, Fulham, Everton, Brighton, Villa. That's 10 sort of opportunities for lost points before the end of January. The board absolutely should have reacted. And that's why they're second for me, because of the way they handled the season. But the driver in that was the injuries. And that's the reason we lost in 10 separate game weeks. I think the main reason we lost that. We went into the season with 7 attackers. They should have reacted. That's why they're second. But to me, I have to look at the injuries.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, to attack it from a different angle then. Because if we're assuming injuries are a driver to this season a little bit more, right? How many injuries would you describe are related to us not signing somebody to lessen the load? Say you had 10 injuries that included Mikel Merino, Odegaard, your Gabriel Martinellis, the Bukayo Sakas, the Jesus. How many are related to you, to the strain on the squad being forced to play through the situation that they were at.
I think there you're getting into tricky waters because you have to look at the coaching staff as well, because they're picking them. The board pay the money for the players, and Mikel accepted, for example, Raheem Sterling. So I know what you're getting at, but in terms of, let's just look at like Bukayo Saka, that's probably one that we can relate to load management, right? Ultimately, we have to also include the coaching staff and Mikel Arteta in that. I think that can't be, maybe +1 in terms of a number would have helped that, but we needed +5 at this point in the way the season's played out.
But I think with that, right, okay, so the whole thing, let's just isolate Bukayo Saka. We said Raheem Sterling had to be good enough to give Bukayo Saka, like that was the whole, if there was a pro of Raheem Sterling, that was the only pro that we said it had to be, right? Categorical failure. And so when you're looking at even accompanying the coaching roles there, my point is Gabriel Martinelli is injury. Like, he's got a hamstring because he's been forced to play the amount of minutes. And if you look at his total minutes over the season, at this point, it was already at a red line. Kai Havertz, same thing. The amount of minutes he was forced to play through is because, again, the lack of forwards and the people that already went down. I would argue, of the forward line and of the forward injuries, Saka was owed an we were very lucky, given his minutes and loads, that Saka hasn't had an injury in his time at Arsenal. Very, very lucky. I think load, and specifically from a lack of attacking quality, is a direct result of 3 major injuries this season. Kai Havertz, Gabriel Martinelli, both of those hamstrings, and potentially Saka. That doesn't even go into others. But putting that to a side, that's one part of it. But if I was to get your collective view in the summer, right? What did you guys feel was the biggest difference to get Arsenal over the line when we looked back on last season? And just correct me if I'm wrong, I heard this characterization quite a bit. Defensively, one of the best in the team. One of the biggest things that we've got to stop is losing in clusters. What does that need? That needs to have a solution to a mid-block, but fundamentally, we need to be more clinical in goal. We have seen a lot of consistency from January onward, in which we were finally able to see us score quite a bit of goals, that it started from Palace and onwards. But had we improved our goal-scoring prowess and chance creation in the first 4 months of that season, where we were a little bit more poor, we would be looking at a difference in the title. Was something that I was hearing categorically. And when I then asked people's lists, and again, that to me is pre-injuries. Pre-injuries, and we're talking like the start of the season, what you felt that Arsenal needed. I thought everybody admitted we would spend at least £100. I think that was an accepted fact. People wanted more, but I think...
Hopefully more than £100.
Well, £100 million, sorry. I think people didn't think we would spend less than what we did outside of Europe, unless I'm wrong. I think you can do that categorically. Then when you build the list, right, everybody had a forward, and that forward was the largest spend of any signing, categorically. Now, we can debate names. I don't want to try to get into people's head, but that's why, to me, it's unfair to say that people didn't feel it wasn't a driver to the season. I think everybody, when you're talking about there being 7 forwards, it wasn't a depth issue. It wasn't like, I'm just missing something else. I think people were very isolated and very specific to stop losing in clusters, to ensure that we have a sustainable run of goal scoring for 12 months, not 6 months or 5 months of the season. We needed a significant addition in the forward line that matched the spend of Declan Rice. That was actually what I was seeing, pretty categorical to a lot of people. And it didn't have to be a £100 million player, but they wanted a £100 million investment, because that was the only thing that we haven't done so far in any of the departments. And I just think that's why, to me, it wasn't a reaction to injuries necessarily. That was the narrative pre-injury, and then post-injury, it just got even worse. Then that was a case of okay, now with the injuries, you've received it, now you're digging yourselves an even deeper hole. And I don't really have an answer for why.
I think we're slightly going over old ground. I do want to kind of move on, but just to address that, I suppose it comes down to this. let's say the Cronkies had signed that £100 million player, which they absolutely should have done last summer. That's why they're second in my list of why this year's gone wrong. And I think you said I said it's not a driver. It absolutely is. It is a driver. It's just the question is how big is it compared to injuries? You're saying an £100 million player would have changed the fortunes of this season. Maybe it would. But if Saka and Martinelli and Havertz and Jesus all go down, you could have Messi on the pitch.
But do they?
If you
That's
have
the
all
point.
those players who...
I don't think they do. Like, you have a £100 million signing, you're not looking
it's
at...
a part. It's a part of the picture, but I think it's maybe unfair to isolate it to this season. Martinelli and Saka and Havertz in terms of their load, that's been coming over the course of many seasons. We've had Reece Nelson and Eddie Nketiah and stuff on the bench, and we can go back and then that's into coaching, that's into whatever. I just think I can't look past Rohan those injuries as the main driver for what's happened this season.
Do you know what it is as well? It's like, because then we get into and I hear what George is saying, if we had signed X or Y, then we would have been able to manage the load of the current players that we have a lot better. And I'm not in any proper position to really talk loads about the medical side of things, but what I do know is, and it's one of my criticisms of Mikel, that still is there for me now. So I think we all can agree that Mikel has adapted really well to the circumstances that he's faced this season in the league. I stand by that, irrespective of what has happened in the Forest game and West Ham game results-wise. I think he's done really well to navigate through the season and to have us where we are in the league. But if we had a fully fit squad available, I don't have the evidence there in front of me to suggest that he's going to manage the squad properly, because he didn't do that last season, even when we did operate a 100-point pace. The beauty of last season was that we were able to pick a settled 11 consistently from 2024 onwards, and that was a massive strength of ours. But the other issue from that, our strength was also kind of sometimes our downfall as well, because we couldn't give some of the players on the bench, the likes of Smith Rowe, the likes of Vieira, the likes of Nketiah, game time to manage some of the workload of the players that were there on the pitch. Like that Aston Villa game was a really good example of that last season, where the first half, that was one of the best performances that we've had this season. And the second half, you see a clear physical drop-off of the team, and then we start to make some substitutions. The substitutions aren't able to have the impact that you'd think they should have, but because they've been left out to dry, they're cold. They've not been given the game time. So my argument would be is that we could have signed a £100 million player, but I don't know if we would have still managed the squad properly if we had players fit and available, which could still have led to these injuries occurring. So that's where I stand on it, and that's why I think the biggest problem has been the injuries. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. I hear that. Yeah. Let's give our final rankings then. So I think I've ended up with injuries at number 1, board and owners at number 2, officials and PGM at number 3, and coaching at number 4. George, give us your rankings.
I'm at board number 1, injury number 2, officials number 3, and coaching at number 4.
Injuries number 1, board at number 2, officials number 3, and coaching number 4.
Stop copying me, Rohan. Let us know what you thought in the comments below, and obviously on the Patreon and YouTube member side as well. Let us know what you think, and on our Discord, etc., etc. Please do get involved. Interesting one. We were going to do like a mid-block breakdown, but it feels like we've kind of gone through quite a lot of that recently. So let's move on to some questions. George, you said you had some on the Discord. I have some.
I do. You want me to go first on Discord?
Go for it.
Okay, this is from Dinny. Thank you from your question from the Discord. Given what we have to work with, how would you personally set up to give us the best chance of winning the Champions League this season? And I will just caveat that.
Dream big, Dinny.
And I will just caveat that with, let's assume you have Bukayo Saka and Martinelli back fit. But understanding they've just come back from big injuries.
So I think, and I said this after the transfer window as well. Well, the fact that we didn't do anything, so it wasn't even a transfer window, so forget about that. But I think for me,
the window,
the window,
January, as it was.
January. Arsenal's best chance of success from now to the end of the season is heavily dependent on Ricardo Calafiori and Ben White. in attacking sense. And for me, that stands in the Champions League as well. The Forest game, we obviously haven't spoke about it. We didn't need to talk about it, but I said it to you on TCP Live. My hopes of winning that game went down the drain when Calafiori came off. I saw, where's Calafiori? Kieran Tierney's on. No disrespect to Kieran Tierney, I love Kieran Tierney, but it's like what Calafiori offers to that left-hand side. You could see it in the first half. We ended up doing nothing in that second half through the left. Absolutely zilch. That could open up a debate of a wider problem, but strictly looking now, he is so key in terms of how Arsenal can attack through that left-hand side. And likewise, Ben White is so key to how Arsenal attack through the right-hand side. And what has Mikel always alluded to in press conferences when he talks about injuries? He's always alluded to Ben White, Ødegaard, Saka as a trio, as a unit of being able to give Arsenal that level of quality that we have seen consistently for a number of years. Now, and it's interesting because Jurrien Timber's had a fantastic season. He's an incredible defender. But what Ben White offers in the attacking third and the dynamism and just that level of chemistry and synergy with the others, it's unmatched. And I think we absolutely need that. And any way of Arsenal having success in the Champions League has to come from having a Ben White, having a Calafiori. I personally want to see Martinelli up front. I've felt this and I've said this many times. I don't think it will happen, but I would like to see Martinelli up front with Trossard on the left, but kind of being interchangeable as you saw in 22-23 with Jesus and Martinelli. So that is how I think Arsenal are going to be able to thrive, and with Ethan Monieri pushing in that right centre mid spot.
Pushing what?
Wait, sorry. So just really quickly, Rohan, are you with that? Is Nwaneri starting? Assuming Saka's in, what's your right hand side? Because if he's pushing, are you saying is he a left 8 or what are you saying?
Yeah, if you told me right now, I would move Martin Ødegaard left 8 and Ranieri right 8. I would do that. And Arsenal can tweak their press to ensure Martin Ødegaard still remains integral. I know that is one of the big things that is said a lot in
just
regards to Martin Ødegaard. But I will go with that. But it's not something that's set in stone. But if you ask me right now, that is what I would do with Rice as your
So you're saying...
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it depends who we come up against. Look, I think... It's a bit of an obvious thing, but I think leaning into our strengths, especially in the back end of this season, considering who we have available, is really key to me. Yeah. I look at Calafiori and Miles and Marino and Gabriel and Saliba and White and Timber and these guys who hopefully will have their load managed a little bit better as we've had some players return. What helps people in cup competitions has always been the defensive security, and I think we can absolutely lean into that. I think it's a shame because I'm looking forward to the rest. Well, I want to be looking forward to the rest of the season and see us playing some free-flowing attacking football. And maybe there'll be times that happens, but I think there's going to be a lot of games towards the end of the season where we just grind it out. And I think that could help us in the Champions League. I don't think we're going to go far in terms of semi-final or a final. I think there'll probably be if we've come up against Madrid, I've got big worries. But defensively, we can absolutely be secure. We know what this Arsenal team is. The one thing that hasn't changed from 23-24 to now, and I don't want to change, is the defensive security. So, and I think it is a sad indictment on where we are that we're saying 2 fullbacks are going to be key to us attacking. And you're absolutely right. I completely agree with you. I think that's the only way we can get through in the Champions League is unfortunately to be probably quite boring and grind
play on the margins.
But yeah, George. Yep.
So Champions League is about moments, and I think that you need to really amp up your identity. And for us, that identity is our press. You need to make sure that you have the people in that 11 that are able to outpress anybody, because even with injuries, guys, and even with Bukayo Saka and Martinelli coming back, there's one thing I will say about Arsenal Football Club. They have the best press in the world. The best press in the world. And anyways, I won't hide from my 11. I mean, David Raya, obviously, inside. Ben White, I have said so many times, I don't think people realize how much we miss Ben White. And I love Jurrien Timber. We're going to have a conversation there, because I do think a lot of things got said about how Jurrien Timber is guaranteed the right back spot that I just don't agree with what Ben is able to give us and this team in the final third. I'm with Rohan. I think Calafiori has to play in the Champions League. I think what he gives you is huge from a personality standpoint and from a transition standpoint. And within European competitions, like that space that you're afforded, it's not a Premier League game. And you need somebody with that experience there. So I would have Calafiori, Gabriel, and Saliba, of course, in the back line. This is where it gets interesting. Big gamble. But when you've got Calafiori bombing, and he won't be in the left back spot, and we know what he offers defensively, I want Miles Lewis-Skelly starting in left 8. I want Declan Rice to anchor the midfield, and I want Martin Odegaard to be in at right central midfielder. And I would want Bukayo Saka, Trossard false 9, and Martinelli. And what I look at that left pod, it would be very fluid. Trossard and Martinelli can interchange between 9, exactly how you were saying, Rohan. I think they decide when they want to go in and out. But fundamentally, when Calafiori is bombing on, I want Miles and somebody next to Declan Rice to stop that transition, to let Calafiori have the freedom that he had against Forest. Like the idea that he could be so far ahead and offer himself on the last line, it means Declan has to either drop deep, but also I need somebody else that's a dueler to allow ourselves to do it. I just think the right-hand side with Martin Odegaard, there's a conversation there. I don't want to tread on old ground, but fundamentally, this is a captain. This is a guy that leads our press. And if we're talking, and this is my identity in the Champions League, if we want to stand any chance, it is maximize your press.
Do you know what it is as well? Just really quickly to add on this, the right-back situation is very interesting because I think it very much depends on the game state. Let's say, right, Arsenal beat PSV and we come up against Real Madrid. And again, we're going fairy tale again. Let's say in the first leg, we've got a 2-goal lead.
And let's say that.
But let me then go to the final. I've stopped with the let's say then. So let's say Arsenal go into the second leg against Real Madrid with a 2-goal lead. That is when I need a Jurriën Timber at right back. Yeah. Absolutely need a Jurriën Timber. So it's kind of like when we go over Ben White and we're up against these tricky wingers, I'm asking Saliba to really dominate the channel, as Ben pushes forward. But when you have a Timber and we're being a little bit more conservative, we can keep Saliba a little bit more central. So, yeah, a lot of let's says because we ain't being Real Madrid. Because I'm just... Yeah.
No, believe, come on. Next question is from MJ419 on the Discord. He says, who would you guys want as a sporting director? George, you'll have to take Berta and... what's his other, the other bloke? Scuro, because I don't know them. But Rohan, just before we do that, because I want to come to those and sort of talk about them, what do you want in a sporting director?
I've said it many times where he needs to be more experienced than Mikel. I think that is absolutely imperative. He needs to be someone who has a track record of rebuilding a squad successfully and being there around success in some form of capacity. He can't be a contrarian, but he can't be a yes man. It needs to be a balance. It needs to be someone who aligns with the vision of the football club, but it is someone who can make those difficult decisions and be very much someone who can say, no, that is the wrong decision. We can't do that. And you go with his idea because of the experience that he's had and being in that sort of situation. Now, I think Mikel Arteta, we're all massive fans, but I think, he has his... Well, it's not... I think he has his flaws, and that's okay. He's still very early in management, and the reality is that he's not going to be able to do everything perfectly, and we have seen a lot of mistakes along the way, and that's why I think we need someone there to guide him, to help him, to take Arsenal to the next level. I think this is just as important as any signing Arsenal make in the summer window. If Arsenal get this wrong, it could have a really bad look on the project that follows. And that's why I think it's massive, because we need someone who has that nous, that know-how.
I do think it's maybe being slightly underrated. I think a lot of people will not ignore the process. Most Arsenal fans are going to know who it is, but probably not think about it too deeply. But I actually think this is a real opportunity. I think when you look at, in terms of what we have at the moment, in terms of the football decision makers you've got in the room, there's probably others, but generally James King, who's the director of football operations, Richard Garlick, who's managing director, Tim Lewis, who is the executive vice chair, I think is his name. Anyway, the Kroenkes guy. But there is a space. and that space can be filled in a number of different ways. And I am curious to see how it goes, because the likes of Richard Garlick, if they want to keep making football decisions, is it going to be as a sporting director? I think it will be, but there might be a space for different roles and different ways of doing it, and that's certainly a question, maybe one we should come to. But in terms of the names that have been linked, I think for Ashworth, I've been doing a lot of research on him this weekend. Everything I read about Ashworth is someone who can structure things, and who is, I think he even has the quote himself, like the spokes of the wheel. Like he almost considers himself like the middle of things. Everything I read about his time at Brighton, Newcastle, etc., it feels like he's the guy who can kind of come in, get the house in order, put people in the right positions, understand a system. He's very professional. I watched his interview with him against Newcastle. He's never going to be like the face of a project. Maybe we don't need that with Mikel. But he feels to me a little bit like Arsenal needed him like 5 years ago. It may still work, I don't know. But for me at the moment, I think Ashworth is obviously a big name, but I think the idea he's going to come in and give this sort of genius edge. I think he'd sign the guys who'd give us that genius edge. I don't know if he by himself, from what I read, is that guy. I don't know, but that's my overall feeling. Ato is an interesting one. I think there's a really good profile on him in The Athletic. It's tricky because he's getting a lot of flack. He's obviously an impressive guy. I think he speaks multiple languages. He impressed the Cronkies, supposedly, it says in this Athletic article, when he went in November after Edu had resigned. I just think optically signing a guy who is internal, even though it gives some continuity, even though supposedly Ato is involved in the youth side of things and is in that rebuild and sort of how things have happened on the youth side. He's been heavily involved. He's been involved in, I think, the Havertz transfer, the Timber transfer, the Marino transfer. Apparently he was big in the Calafiori talks. He's been in the room and he provided a lot of continuity. I just think optically signing, promoting from within when you already have a number of guys in their first role at Arsenal is going to be very tricky. If they do it, wow, that's brave. Wow, this guy must be good. And I'll be going to be very, very interested. And then finally on Olabe, I think it makes a lot of sense. I've seen some reporting over the weekend that he is going to take a year away, I think from Mate Moretto, so that may just not happen. But it makes a lot of sense in terms of the experience that people are looking for, in terms of the Real Sociedad, in terms of the Spanish connections. He's had some, obviously, good stuff in the transfer market with the Isaks and the Odegaards, but also people like Robin Normand, who went to from Brest to Sociedad and then moved on to Atletico. So he's had some, George is laughing at Brest. He's had some success. I don't know if he's the fire that this project needs. But again, it's difficult to know. And if he's the right guy internally, and supposedly he's Mikel's first pick, then maybe he is. Of those three, I don't have a first pick, but curious to hear your takes on Berta and Scuro, Georgie boy.
It's difficult because one thing I just want to get off the bat is this is such a personality. When you talk about does he have the drive, like on Olabe and stuff, there's just so many different types to lead, Like I look at Scuro.
Yeah, it's difficult to say.
Like just because you're quiet, it doesn't mean like I think, oh no, you can't be like passionate or driven or enact your ideas. Just because you're not yelling, do you need to be an Italian that has fire and passion to do it? I'm not saying that you, by the way, said that. It's just funny because when you list what is needed, it's impossible without having these interviews, and this is why I think we're taking so long. You're seeing if the personality can match. Look, very interesting names. Another one just to throw out, by the way, that The Athletic did talk about in the past and that we've seen links with in the past was Simon Rolfs from Leverkusen, who had done some really brilliant work in terms of building that team. That was somebody that we were linked. I won't talk about him because obviously, you asked me to on the short list that we have been more linked with. Okay, Scuro is a very interesting one. He has a lot of experience in South America. And, he came back and really built the project from Monaco's perspective as their sporting director in 2023. And, he was responsible, I believe. There's a couple signings, so don't kill me if I'm missing them. But, he had Mohamed Salisu, he had Valerian Balogun, Thilo Kerr, Dennis Zakaria, Wilfred Singo, Ouattara. These were all kind of, in his first year, the major signings that he made to that kind of Monaco side. And then when you look at it, guys, they have a brilliant setup in terms of a very exciting team that is really rebuilt and trying to emulate some of the success they really lost in 2017 with that Lamar class that really put them on the global stage and the global map. And I think Skuro has a really interesting background in South America, something that we have been yelling about at this club, given the Edu past that we never really saw. And this is a guy that has had absolute experience within there. And so we've clearly been a team that have dominated the domestic market. It makes sense to find somebody with significant contacts in an area of the world that maybe we lack and we don't have like great strength in. And one thing that I love is he had a really good interview, Skuro, with I think it was BN or BEIN, whatever that is, BN, right? Which is like really good. And he was talking a lot about how the success and the vision of a sporting director is linked with the midterm future of a club. I love that line because the biggest problem with Arsenal not pulling the trigger was a midterm view, in my opinion. It wasn't just the threat of injuries, but it was understanding, okay, maybe it fails your financial evaluation. That's possible. You know what I mean? Maybe Ollie Watkins is not financially literate. But what is the midterm future to the squad that goes another year without trophies? What's the impact on your extensions, on Saliba, on other things? There was a real emphasis from his perspective to really think about the collective midterm future of the club, whilst also presenting some really great, smart data buys that, by the way, he continued with Mika Bireth from Surin Graz, who's now got 3 hat-tricks in 10 games, who again was another Arsenal Youth Academy player. And he loves Arsenal. There's a connection there in terms of Valerian Balogun, Mika Bireth. He's looking at what we do. And this is a smart guy, a young guy, I think he's like 42, that is still experienced. He is young with innovative ideas, but again, tons of experience in South America in terms of his come up. So we're not talking about a total new person, which is what I like. There is some experience there. Granted, this may be his first big job. Now, last on the list, Berta. Guys, as far as experience goes, you don't get much more experience than Berta in terms of how long he's been, over a decade in charge of sporting directors. He started out as a scout at Atletico Madrid. He's overseen that club for the better part of 20 years. And when we look at what Atletico Madrid have been able to do in the last 20 years in terms of the competitiveness relative to the resources of Barcelona and Real Madrid, he was an integral part of that back line, overseeing transfers like from Griezmann, Luis Suarez.
The forwards are insane.
Insane. Is there a better collection? Is there a better collection of identified profiles that Atletico Madrid have done over the last 20 years? Guys, we're forgetting Cavani, Diego Costa, Suarez, Griezmann,
Falcao.
Jesus, Falcao. Look at that list. They know what a good forward is. Yeah. And for as much as, Simeone gets all of the plaudits for how defensive his style is and how being able to do that and how kind of recruiting a very specific type of player, I see a club that have successfully rebuilt world star forwards. We're talking Falcao, Cavani, Griezmann, Luis Suarez. Guys, these aren't just, he was very good. We're talking rebuilding potentially top 10 strikers of their time. And, by the way, consistently selling at a very good price. Yeah. Atletico Madrid, the reason, by the way, that they can continue to rebuild is because they are masters of the big sale. So, look, I think that there's a lot there. I think the difficulty with sporting directors, guys, that I do want to just end on this, it is an elite list. One thing I'm not worried about fundamentally, we could fail in people's eyes and land on a brilliant sporting director. And I don't mean it kind of facetiously. It's just all these guys are top. They're very good names. I haven't seen a mistake, bar potentially Ato.
That would be, I was going to say, please. No, please.
It's the only, and to be fair, Thomas Rosicky was linked. So I don't want to be ignoring that. But if you really read between the lines, what are the names that are popping up? They're Skuro, they're Berta, they're Rolfs, they're Olabe, they're Ashworth. It is an experienced, an elite list. Good. And they're all with clubs that have overperformed, guys. Think about it. Leverkusen, Real Sociedad, Atletico Madrid. By the way, we're forgetting there was a link to Sartori of Bologna at the very beginning of this. We're looking at teams that have outperformed the market with very modern approaches with people that are experienced. So for me, I don't know, mate. Like I felt like Olabe made sense for a lot of reasons. I love Dan Ashworth. I think it makes so much sense with Richard Garlick and the ethos of the type of signings we make, that we prioritize the domestic recruitment. Because I think what identified Mikel's recruitment, by the way, when he first came in, was the domestic push. It's always going to be the domestic push. And finding somebody that's able to find value, and that seems to me to make the most sense. But yeah, I don't have, hey, he has to be it, and if we don't do it, we failed. I legit think that's an elite list, guys. And I'm not even trying to set a lot of criticisms of the board, this pod. This search, I think you could fail.
I might need that Atletico Madrid guy. I might need him.
Oh, I like
forwards. Get me my Falcao and Suarez.
Yeah, I said this at the top. Like, it's an opportunity right now to shape Arsenal. Like, it doesn't. We don't have to replace Edu. We are finding a new way forward. And then it's like, okay, do you need more communication? Do you need someone who's elite at identifying attacking forwards? Do you need someone who's great on the domestic market? Whatever, we can shape it here. And the appointment is going to be so interesting. I mean, the Ato thing. I mean, people talk about it. Look, if we do that, people will kick off, but I'll be really interested, because that is an incredibly brave decision to do that right now at this juncture. If we did it, which to be clear, I don't want us to do it, but if we did it, that's an incredibly brave thing to do.
You might call it interesting. I'll be kicking off for sure. If it's
but clearly, like, and I think people will want some communication around it. But like, ultimately, I want it to go to the best person, and if he is the best person for the job, then great. I don't think he is, but I'd be really curious if he is, and whoever it is, I'm really curious because there's a new sort of way.
The thing for me though, and I made this analogy before, right? When you leave uni and you're looking for your first grad job, right? You don't want to be partnered with another grad as your mentor. You want to be
true, but bro,
you want to be mentored by someone who's
Before Pep did what he did with Barca, he was their B coach. And that's an exception because it's Pep. But my point being that, like, you just don't know who you have. I just want to be clear. Jason Ato is my 5th choice because people are going to get me wrong. He's my 5th choice on that list and probably lower if we add other names in. But what I'm saying is what the club do is interesting, even if it is Ato, because it's going to shape Arsenal for the next couple of years.
Jason Ato is clearly
you want
the
Jason
one.
Ato.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
I just want to have one last
me.
question, because I actually think this is something we don't even need to talk names about. Genuinely, how much power do you believe the sporting director should have? And can you guys maybe give me your impression of what you feel a successful order of responsibility looks like for whoever steps into the job? Regardless, it could be Ato. I don't care about the name, but how do you think this needs to work synergy-wise for us to change what's gone wrong for you? And again, how much power do you feel he has to have or can't have or should have with Mikel? Where does that definition go for you guys on sporting directors?
For me, it's difficult because I think I'm looking at where the project is right now, and I think we can all agree that we need to win now. The time is now for Arsenal to win big trophies. So I am going to be very critical, even more critical of the signings that we make from now until the end of this Mikel Arteta project. And with that criticism towards Mikel, I'll have to project that same criticism towards the sporting director as well, because he needs to be someone who can take Arsenal to that next level of being able to bring in the required quality. And I think that's where it's I think we all agree that quality is the biggest driver of turning Arsenal from where we are now to get to that next level. And that comes from being able to make the right decisions. And I think my assessment is going to be very simple in that regard. It needs to be someone who's going to be a catalyst in taking Arsenal to the next level, in bringing in the desired quality.
I think it's all very well asking, I want my sporting director to have these responsibilities and I want him to do this. And it's going to depend on the chemistry at board level. In the same way that when Mikel arrived, he arrives as a head coach, and now his responsibilities will be wildly different because it's naturally gone that way. I think we can sort of accept that. The most important thing for me is defining, I suppose, what we really need to do. And for me, it's win now.
Yeah.
That's what it is. I'm not looking for a project guy. I'm not looking for a guy to communicate really well. I'd love that, but particularly, I'm not looking for a guy to make friends. I'm not looking for a guy to be at Arsenal for 10 years. I'm looking for a guy to win now. So what that translates to is a guy who can come in with contacts, get the right stuff over the line in the summer. Maybe that means, as a sort of a byproduct of that, ruffle a few feathers. But then in that, then you go, okay, where the responsibilities lie. And to answer your question, George, it's hard to say, because the most important thing is win now, and then you go from there. If he's going to win now, I'll give him a bit more responsibility. If he's going to win now, if to win now what he needs is a hands-off approach, give him a hands-off approach. If to win now what he needs is total control, do you do that? Maybe you don't. But it all comes from there. I think no two sporting director roles are the same. No two, and you look at, I always talk about this, but the United structure, it's like the director of football operations, the director of football negotiations, no one really knows where one role ends and the other begins. No one really does. They will know, but externally, as fans, it's very difficult to be like, oh, that was definitely their responsibility. We're looking at results, really. What I want is someone to win now, and they maybe need to be given some keys to do that, or they may not. And yeah, the appointment will be fascinating regardless.
Yeah, I think I just would go a little bit further. Like, okay, the biggest thing for me is I don't think Arsenal's board failures are from a result of a lack of talent. So what I mean by that is I don't believe it's because we're lacking an expertise in a particular area. That's why we failed. I look at Arsenal and I think the biggest bug or illness is a fear from action. It is a fear and an apprehension from doing something with the fear that it could be worse down the line. We seem to do that, a version of that in the board, like a lot, in terms of our biggest mistakes. And there might be legitimate reasons for it. There might be stuff that we don't know as a club. But the one thing that I want is I want a collective voice. I'll do an analogy with my own lab and what I do at work. So I have a supervisor, of course, which you can maybe attribute to Josh Kroenke, who leads a lab full of master's and PhD students. And, we have a research manager. And I am an expert in terms of what I know with my project. But I don't know what the master student exactly is doing. I could definitely lead some advice, and I can absolutely have some overlap in terms of trying to help him with his project. But ultimately, he is an expert in his project. The same with some of the undergraduate students that are working on diversity training that's within our lab. That's something I know nothing about. I could try to help them as far as a mentor goes in terms of how you progress from undergrad to larger studies, and I can overlap some responsibilities with you. But fundamentally, we've got a manager that actually defines timelines, defines goals, and at every research meeting gives me a clear consequence and a clear excelled achievement from my timeline. Tells me when I should expect it and when I feel I've met it. He doesn't tell me what to do in my project or anything like that. I feel we need a research manager. We need a voice that can collect these experts that we do have in the team and in the background, and have a unified timeline, a unified vision that we all accept, and we're seeing clarity in that. Far too often, I just feel like even in the reports that we've got from some of the failures of January and whatnot, it seemed again one voice dominated versus others wanted something else. Like Mikel Arteta, the players, heck, we even got reporting that Josh was in support of Mikel. So I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, okay, of those major decision makers, two that you've absolutely had, and I can't understand if Ada was against or for it, but I think he must have been for a signing. He was looking for them. But let's just remove as unknown. Two of the major decision makers between Josh and Mikel categorically said, okay, yes, you guys need a signing. But it didn't end up happening. So I'm asking, I don't know why, but if two of your major decision makers have agreed on the pendulum where sporting director should fill the third major pillar in that backroom staff, I need to understand why the majority didn't get the decision right. That to me is failure in the timeline. And it's not from a lack of talent, because I believe that we've identified players, no. We've got people within the club that are top at their job. So ultimately, if a majority agreed in a decision, hey, buy the red pill, and you didn't buy a pill, I'm saying, okay, what the heck happened, guys? As a lab, how did we fail? And there needs to be a stronger voice, and that's what I would like to see come out of this.
We need alignment, and I agree with you. I don't think it's talent, because we have all the data, we have all the contract guys, we have football expertise at that level. We need alignment, but I think we have been very aligned as a football club for basically the last 5 years. It's just probably this window. So I don't want to go too overboard on, well, this happened and this report came out and stuff like that. Ultimately, we don't really know. And in the end, we're judging results. And in the end, we're getting reports and we're going, oh, we can triangulate stuff and whatever. We don't really know. For me, and maybe just to conclude on this because we have to wrap up, I think the most important thing is that alignment. Whatever they do, we can't feel that fractiousness. I think we felt that in January. That's what we don't really know what they're doing. We don't know what the decision was. And George, you're saying Josh categorically wanted a signing. I don't know if we can know that, but what we can know is the alignment is really important, and that's what's really helped Arsenal for a long time. And that's what I felt change in January. I really felt that moment of Mikel and Rice and stuff, the public stuff that we do know, we could really put together a clear picture.
I'm just doing
I
the
think
Josh,
that's what I'd love to return to.
Like, just to clarify, I'm doing the Josh thing because that's the reporting from Gunner Blog in terms of him being in support of Mikel. That was his reporting. It could be wrong. Maybe the reporting's wrong, and maybe it wasn't Josh. But
as in the idea that Josh was pushing for a signing or whatever. I think he was supporting, from what I remember that report, he was supporting Arteta. But we don't. My point is, it's very, with a lot of these things, it's very hard to be categorically, this is what happened. Tim Lewis said to Richard Garlick, I don't go in for that stuff. For me, I just think it's got to be aligned, and I don't feel that in January.
Do you think it was also aligned in the summer though, in terms of what we did? Did you feel?
I think more so. I think that's probably, if I was speculating, which is what I am doing, and I don't know. If I was speculating, I would suggest that probably, and going back on what we were saying earlier, probably the Edu stuff was starting to take hold. We don't know. We can only speculate, and probably that led to a bit of fraction, and that's what's happened. That would be my guess, but we don't know. I would just love to feel the club aligned again, and that comes from communication. That comes from public stuff that we have to take, and then we can triangulate beyond.
Effectively, we need.
We'll see.
Effectively, we need kind of you had in just before Unai Emery's last season at Arsenal in the in 2019, just before that summer, we obviously had. I think that was when Raul Sanllehi, he left in that summer. Just before that, I think it was.
Yeah.
And then you had Mikel eventually becoming, very involved in the 2020 summer, and then from 2020 till this summer, we could agree that there's clear evidence suggests that there's been significant cohesion and alignment across all levels. I think the level of turbulence starts from this summer to this window, the January window. I think that's where I think it's the first time we've seen maybe hints of slight fracture. Whereas there wasn't that fracture before, and that's where I think we need to get back to. Yeah, and I just think this sporting, the person needs to be someone who can just help Arsenal get to that next level. That's what it's about now. We have to win.
Yeah, and I hope it means that voice. It doesn't have to be the sporting director that makes the alignment. For me, it can be Mikel, it can be whatever. I just hope that we have a process that this doesn't repeat again. That's really what I'm coming from. I don't want to see a fractious decision-making process again, and I want to see what are the steps that we've done to ensure it doesn't. Now, it could happen again. We can evaluate that, but just give me your plan, because you haven't communicated it. It's been very what if. And, I feel personally, I just got to speak to myself, every time we've questioned the board, it's been a big thing of we can't know. And then we find out later, and I think it comes down to there's legitimate questions that we haven't had the answer to. When it comes, for example, the finances of last summer, we can't know the implications because those accounts don't come out until later. But then we find out the accounts and they're fine. But we still haven't got an answer for why the summer ended the way it did. I look back at January, and amidst all the articles, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, I actually haven't seen an explanation for why the signing didn't happen. I saw that there was a missing valuation, but there actually wasn't, for me, okay, Arsenal believe that going in for a signing is detrimental to summer plans, that they believe they will get somebody better. or there hasn't even been a reason that I've been told that I can understand as to why January happened. So I'm looking towards more transparency and clarity as far as when things don't go right, at least tell me what's going on, because I can see the public spats happening, and I feel like that's just not good for the club.
Yeah, and just so we don't run over, I'm just going to just pull it there. But yeah, I think that's basically what we're all aligned on, is that we need communication and alignment. Personally, I think the triangulation stuff is really tricky. But regardless, that only happens because we want communication. We just want someone to come out and say, this is what happened. This is what we're doing. And then we fill in the gap. And, whether you go think of this or that report, this, but whatever, we're filling in gaps. I just want that communication, want that alignment. Because, as Rohan said, it felt like we had that for a period of time, and it feels like we've just sort of been slipping away from it for a little while. We will, of course, return to that subject at some point. I think Ornstein said it would be in the month of March, so we'll come to that at some point when it all comes out and do some proper reporting on that when it comes out. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. We've got all sorts of pods coming next week. We've got instant reaction to the PSV game. We've got a youth pod coming next week. TCB Live, obviously, and instant reaction to the Manchester United game, who... I actually feel sad for them at this point. Genuinely, it's like kicking a dead dog.
Oh, I love it.
And they've gone out of the FA Cup.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, do you know what I think? They're so bad that at some point it becomes mean. It's like bullying the fat kid. No, I'm not going to say that. It's like bullying the.
Give me all United tears, and with a side of double, please.
Alex, you don't realise, if Man United were good, you're talking about unbearable fan bases, right?
Oh my
They
God.
would be the worst.
Yeah, they would.
They're
be
way worse than
They would
Arsenal. Trust me. I know what Man United fans like. Keep kicking them.
Thank you for listening. Thank you, Rohan.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, good sir.
Thanks for watching and listening, and thanks for keeping it Arsenal.